What happens when the man you mocked for having nothing quietly builds a case against you? How far can someone go when betrayal is met not with shouting, but with silence and lawful revenge? My name is Selena Ardant, and I used to laugh when people said Adrian was too quiet, too careful, too small to ever make something of himself. I told myself I had married a man who would always stay in the shadows, who would never have enough money, never enough ambition, never enough fire to keep up with me. His family sometimes called him practical, even frugal, but I told my friends they really meant broke, and we laughed about it over drinks like it was the funniest thing in the world. Adrian would just sit there at the edge of the table, shoulders stiff, face calm, saying nothing while I turned every joke into proof that he was the problem, that he was holding me back, that I deserved better. When Victor started texting me, full of compliments and wild plans, I told myself I deserved someone exciting after all the years of routine and silence. Adrian never argued, never shouted, never even defended himself when I compared him to other men right in front of everyone. He only got quieter, like he was waiting for something. I thought his silence meant weakness. I didn't know it was the sound of someone planning. Adrian always carried himself like someone who had nowhere to rush, moving through life like it was a long straight road with no surprises. While I told myself I was someone meant for fireworks, someone who deserved big things, loud things, things that made people turn their heads. That night at the cafe, I made sure everyone was listening when I joked about him again, about how he was probably the only man in the room who still worried about price tags like it was the end of the world, about how even his family called him careful with money, but everyone knew the real word was broke. People laughed because people always laugh when someone else becomes the joke. And I laughed the loudest because it made me feel powerful, like I was the star of the story. While he was just a background character, everyone pitied a little. He sat there with his coffee cooling in front of him, saying nothing, just watching me with that same steady face he always wore, the one that never gave anything away. His mother's eyes went sharp like knives across the table, her lips pressed together so tight they almost disappeared, and I could feel her disapproval, like a draft coming through a door I had left open on purpose. My friend Lila smirked and told me later I was right to remind him life was too short to be small, too short to live like everything had to stay safe and ordinary. And I believed her because it was easier to believe I was the brave one instead of the cruel one. Adrian finished his drink, left money on the table, and stood without saying a word, walking out into the evening, like someone late for something important, like someone who had already stopped listening. Everyone thought he was sulking, maybe embarrassed, maybe angry, but I told them he just hated being the center of attention, that he was too sensitive to take a joke, that he had no sense of fun, shaping the story so I was the lively one and he was the one people should laugh at instead of me. Margaret's voice cut across the table cold as ice when she said some things stopped being funny when children were old enough to understand them, but I rolled my eyes because I knew she had always thought her son deserved better than me. Lila changed the subject. Someone ordered dessert. The conversation turned toward other things, but part of me kept thinking about the way Adrian had left, about how his back looked when he walked away, straight as a line drawn on a page, steady like someone who had already made up his mind about something important. When I left the cafe later, I saw him across the street through the big glass window of the hotel lobby, standing with a man in a dark suit who carried a leather briefcase, their heads bent together over some papers on the counter between them. Adrian was nodding slowly while the other man pointed at something on the page, his finger tapping once, twice, like a clock counting down toward something I could not yet see. I told myself it was work because Adrian never stopped talking about budgets and building permits and contracts, his whole job made of lines and numbers that put everyone else to sleep. But there was something about the way he folded those papers so neatly before sliding them into the briefcase that made my stomach twist for one quick second before I pushed the feeling away. At home that night, he barely spoke, just loaded the dishwasher, checked the locks on the doors, kissed the kids goodnight, and sat in the study with the door half closed, while I told Lila on the phone that men like him always needed women like me to keep life interesting, that he should be grateful I kept things from getting too boring. that he would thank me one day for teaching him how to loosen up. I could hear the low sound of his printer through the wall, the steady hum of pages sliding out one after another. But I told myself it was just more of his endless paperwork, the kind of dull things he drowned himself in because he had no idea how to actually live. If he looked at me differently when he came out of the study later, I didn't notice because I was too busy scrolling through my phone, laughing at something Victor had sent, something stupid and charming that made me feel like someone bigger than the life I had, someone meant for better things than a husband who spent his nights printing forms no one else cared about. When I went to bed, Adrian was still downstairs stacking papers into a folder, like they mattered more than sleep, like they were pieces of a puzzle only he could see. And I fell asleep, telling myself he would probably just use them to plan another budget no one would read, never once thinking they had anything to do with me. The next weeks blurred together like days drawn in pencil instead of ink. Easy to smudge, easy to forget, at least for me, because I told myself nothing important was happening while Adrian's silence kept stretching longer each night. Victor sent more messages, little compliments dropped into my phone during work hours, things about how I deserved more than a man who barely looked at me, about how someone like me should be traveling, laughing, living big instead of waiting at home, for a husband who treated life like an equation. And I let those words soak in, because they felt warm, while Adrian's steady quiet felt like winter creeping through the walls. At the real estate office where I worked, Victor stopped by sometimes, always with some excuse about checking property listings or asking for papers he didn't really need. And Lila said it was about time someone paid attention to me properly since Adrian clearly never would. I laughed with her, told her I didn't even care what Adrian thought anymore, told her he would never leave because men like him never left, no matter what you did, and the more I said it, the more I believed it, like it was a fact written somewhere, permanent. At home, Adrian moved through the house like someone measuring every step, every moment, saying little, watching everything, his eyes calm, but sharp in ways I kept pretending not to notice. He asked once why I was late when dinner sat cold on the counter, and I told him I was busy, that he worried too much, that he made problems where none existed, shaping the story, so I was the one carrying all the weight while he was unreasonable for even asking. The children looked back and forth between us like spectators at a quiet game no one explained to them, their faces puzzled when Adrian only nodded slowly and went back to his study instead of arguing like I expected him to. Lila told me later he was probably scared to fight me because he knew I would win, and I liked hearing that because it made me feel powerful, like I had already beaten him at something, even if I couldn't name what it was. One night I passed the study door and saw him scanning receipts into neat folders on his laptop, pages stacked in careful piles across the desk, and I asked if he had taken on more work because the files looked endless. He said something about needing things organized, nothing important, nothing for me to worry about, his voice even and calm like always. But there was a focus in his movements I had not seen before, a kind of purpose that made my stomach twist for half a heartbeat before I told myself he was just being boring again. Lila said maybe he was finally realizing he could lose me if he didn't change, that men sometimes needed a scare to wake up, and I believed her because it fit the story where I was right and he was wrong, where he would have to chase me if he wanted, to keep me. At work, Victor leaned against my desk one afternoon, laughing about some joke I barely heard because I was watching Adrian's car pull into the parking lot outside, slow and steady, like he was looking for something. He came inside only long enough to leave a manila envelope at the front desk before leaving again without speaking to anyone. And when I opened it later, I saw bank statements with his name on them. Nothing else. No note. No explanation. Like he wanted me to know he was watching every dollar, but not telling me why. That night, the house felt heavier than usual. Quiet except for the sound of the printer again behind his study door. The low hum carrying through the hall while the children slept, and I texted Victor things I would later delete. Margaret called once asking if everything was fine because Adrian had been by her house that afternoon with a stack of folders under his arm, and I told her he was probably just organizing bills because he was obsessed with money like always, but her silence before she hung up felt like judgment I didn't want to hear. The next morning, a letter arrived addressed to Adrian from a law office downtown, bold black letters across the top. The kind of envelope people notice even when they try not to. And when I asked about it, he only said it was personal paperwork, nothing I needed to see. His voice so calm it made me feel like I had missed something important happening right in front of me. The birthday dinner at the restaurant was supposed to be fun, at least that was what I told everyone when I invited them, but part of me wanted the kind of night where people looked at me, where they laughed at my jokes, where I felt like the center, instead of just a wife in the background of her own life. Adrian came straight from work wearing his usual plain shirt, no tie, no flash, just the same steady posture he always carried like nothing in the world could shake him. And I felt embarrassed before anything even started because Victor had sent flowers to my office earlier, bright and loud and expensive looking, while Adrian arrived with nothing but that calm expression that always made me feel like he was seeing through me somehow. Lila sat beside me whispering that I should make him loosen up, that I should remind him life was too short to sit quiet like a shadow, and it did not take much for me to start. I laughed too loud when someone teased me about marriage being boring, turning it into a story about how at least my ex had known how to keep things interesting, while Adrian treated everything like a checklist, like romance should be scheduled, between paying bills and checking locks on doors. People laughed because they always do when someone becomes the punchline. And I kept going because the sound of it felt like proof that I was right about him, that everyone could see how small he was compared to the life I told myself I deserved. Adrian sat there with his hands folded on the table, listening, his face unreadable, while Margaret's mouth pressed into that thin line again, the same one she wore at the cafe weeks ago when she told me children eventually understood more than we thought. I ignored her because Lila leaned close saying Adrian needed to be shaken awake, that maybe losing control would finally make him act like a man who valued what he had before someone else took it. I laughed louder after that, telling a story about how even Adrian's own relatives called him careful with money because broke sounded too harsh, watching Margaret's eyes flash like I had crossed some invisible line. Thomas cleared his throat like he wanted to speak, but stopped himself, his jaw tight, his hands on the table stiff enough to look painful. And I wondered why they were all so dramatic when it was only a joke, when I was only making things lively the way I always did. Adrian pushed his chair back before dessert even came, standing so smoothly, it felt like he had been waiting for the right moment to leave. And he walked out without a word, while people looked at each other awkwardly, pretending to sip drinks or check their phones because no one wanted to follow him into the silence he left behind. I told everyone he hated crowds, that he was too sensitive to take teasing, that he always ruined the mood by acting like everything meant more than it did, shaping the story again. So I was the one keeping things light, while he was the problem, the boring husband who could not handle a little fun. Lila nodded like she agreed, but she kept glancing toward the door, like maybe she understood something I did not. Margaret said sharply that respect was not a game, that Adrian had been patient long enough, but I rolled my eyes because she always defended him like he was perfect when everyone knew he was just a man too afraid to fight back. After dinner, people split off quickly, the night feeling heavier than I wanted, and when I walked past the hotel across the street, I saw Adrian again through the window, sitting with the same man in the dark suit I had glimpsed before, the one with the leather briefcase and the serious face, both of them leaning over documents, spread across a table between them. The man was pointing at something while Adrian listened, his expression calm but focused, like someone lining up pieces on a board before the real game started, and I felt a strange twist in my chest. I pushed away fast because Lila was talking about after-party plans, about drinks and music and anything else that made life feel bigger than paperwork and men who lived like clocks. At home later, the children asked why Dad left early, why he did not stay for cake, and I told them he was tired, that he never liked parties, that he would rather count receipts than laugh with family. And they nodded slowly like they half believed me but were not sure. Adrian came in hours later carrying a folder under his arm, setting it carefully on the kitchen counter before locking it in the study drawer, and when I asked what it was, he only said work papers, Nothing for me to worry about. His voice, so even it, felt like a wall closing in around every excuse I had ever used. The first sign that something had changed came so small I almost missed it. Just a card payment declined at the grocery store. Nothing serious, nothing I could not fix by using another one. But it felt strange because Adrian never forgot bills, never left accounts empty, never let small things slip. When I asked later why the joint balance looked different, he said expenses were higher this month. His voice calm like always. No anger, no blame, just steady words that gave nothing away. And I told him he was terrible with money, that I should handle things before he ruined us, turning it into another joke so everyone would see him as the problem while I was the one keeping the family afloat. He only nodded like someone making notes in his head while I kept talking, while I told myself he was too quiet to matter. Lila said maybe he was finally waking up, that sometimes men needed to lose control before they realized what they could lose completely. And I liked hearing that because it meant I was winning something, even if I did not know what the game was yet. But then little things began stacking up like bricks I did not notice until the wall was already there. Bills arriving in his name only, insurance letters sent directly to him, the tax office calling his phone instead of mine, everything flowing toward Adrian while I kept laughing about how boring he was. The children stayed at his parents' house more often because Margaret said they liked the big yard, the quiet rooms, the way Thomas read bedtime stories with voices that made them giggle. But sometimes I wondered if they were staying there because things felt heavier at home now, because Adrian spent evenings locked in his study, with folders spread across the desk, papers lined up like soldiers waiting for orders. I told myself it was work, because it was always work with him, always numbers and diagrams, and things too dull for anyone else to care about. But the printer ran late into the night, and his laptop screen glowed long after the children were asleep. And once I saw receipts stacked beside messages printed from somewhere that looked like my phone, but could not be because I always deleted everything. Lila told me I was imagining things when I said Adrian looked different lately, more focused, like someone moving pieces into place. And she laughed that men like him only threatened to leave but never actually did, because no one else would want them, because quiet men without charm never walked away from wives who made life exciting. And I believed her because it was easier than wondering why Margaret kept giving me that cold look whenever I dropped the children off. Then one afternoon, Adrian came home with a folder, thicker than all the others, his face calm but unreadable as he placed it on the counter before locking it away like always. And later, I saw him carry it out to the car, along with a second briefcase I had never seen before. I asked if he was traveling for work, because he packed shirts into a small overnight bag, and he said he had meetings downtown. Nothing to worry about. His voice the same even tone that made everything sound harmless until it was not. Margaret called that night saying Adrian had stopped by with the children before his meetings, that they were staying with her until the weekend because he wanted them settled while things at home were busy. And when I asked what things she meant, she only said Adrian knew what he was doing, her words heavy like doors closing behind me one by one. Lila said maybe he was trying to scare me because he thought I would beg him to come back if he pulled away far enough. And I laughed because Adrian never scared anyone, because Adrian lived in straight lines without surprises, because Adrian would never risk losing me no matter what I did. But then, the next morning, a letter came from the courthouse with my name printed under respondent, black letters sharp as knives against the white page, and I stood in the kitchen holding it, while Adrian packed the children's school bags like nothing had changed at all, like the ground had not just shifted under my feet, while he moved calmly through the house collecting everything that already belonged to him. The courthouse smelled like paper and polish, the kind of place where everything felt too official to undo once it began. And I kept telling myself Adrian was only trying to scare me, that none of this could actually happen, because husbands like him never really left, never really fought back, never really changed anything no matter what they threatened. He walked ahead, carrying that same folder he had guarded for weeks, shoulders straight, steps steady, dressed in the same plain clothes he always wore, except now they looked like a uniform for someone who had already won. His lawyer met us at the door, a tall woman with sharp eyes, who carried another folder just as thick, and when she shook Adrian's hand, I realized they had been meeting for longer than I knew, probably while I laughed about him at dinners and told Lila he was too weak to do anything real. Inside the courtroom, everything moved slowly but felt heavy, the judge reading from papers, while Adrian's lawyer explained dates, numbers, account balances, printed messages I thought were gone because I deleted them, but apparently deleting does not matter when banks and phone companies keep everything forever. She spoke calmly about stability for the children, about financial responsibility, about temporary orders for custody and accounts until final hearings, each word dropping like stones into water, while I stood there trying to convince everyone this was unfair, that Adrian was twisting things to make me look bad, that he was punishing me because he could not handle a few jokes, a little fun, a marriage that needed more than his steady, quiet life. The judge listened without much expression, asked Adrian's lawyer for more documents, and she handed over pages so neatly arranged it felt like she had been waiting for this day, while I was busy laughing at parties, thinking I held all the cards. Margaret sat behind Adrian like a soldier at attention, her hands folded, her face calm but watchful, while Thomas kept the children at home so they would not see any of this, so they would not hear me accuse Adrian of turning everyone against me, when really no one interrupted because maybe they already agreed with him. Lila did not come at all, said later she had work, but I wondered if she stayed away, because things looked different now, because siding with me no longer felt safe when Adrian held folders full of proof instead of words full of anger. The judge granted temporary custody to Adrian before I understood what was happening, saying the children would stay with him and his parents until final arrangements were decided, that he would manage household accounts to ensure stability, that all assets were frozen until the court reviewed everything, and I kept waiting for someone to look at me like this was too much, too far, too fast, but no one did because Adrian never raised his voice, never lost control, never acted like a man trying to hurt me even while he was cutting away everything I thought I owned. Afterward, he carried the folder out again. The same calm steps, the same quiet face, while people from his lawyer's office spoke about next hearings, about witness statements, about timelines I had not realized were already planned. At home, the locks had not changed yet, but the air felt different, like the house itself knew it no longer belonged to me. Like even the walls leaned toward Adrian when he walked through rooms collecting documents and school schedules while I stood, there telling myself he was only bluffing. Then the call came from his uncle's lawyer about the inheritance, about the estate settled after months of paperwork, about millions Adrian would receive now that everything else was already shifting in his favor, and Margaret's face barely moved. When she heard, because maybe she had known all along, maybe they all knew except me, while I told everyone Adrian was too small, too broke, too boring to ever win anything, he packed the children's bags for the weekend with quiet hands, loaded them into his car, while they asked if I was coming too, and I told them I had things to do, that Dad just needed time to calm down, still shaping the story like I was in control, even while watching his taillights disappear down the street, carrying everything I thought I could never lose. The final hearing felt nothing like the first, because this time there were no surprises left, only pages and signatures and dates that had been waiting for weeks, while I kept telling myself Adrian would stop before it went this far. He sat at the same table with the same calm posture, his lawyer beside him with another thick folder, everything arranged so neatly it made my stomach twist, because I finally understood this was never sudden for him, that he had been building all of it while I laughed at dinners and told friends he was too weak to do anything real. The judge spoke slowly but firmly about custody schedules, about financial accounts, about property division, using words like stability and evidence and best interests, while Adrian's lawyer handed over every document in order, the bank records, showing transfers I thought were private, the phone logs proving late-night calls I believed were gone, the witness statements from neighbors who heard arguments when I told everyone nothing was wrong. She even had photos of receipts from restaurants where I said I was working late, But Adrian had already called ahead, asking for records. Everything lined up so carefully. There was nothing left for me to deny, except the whole story I had told about myself for years. I tried saying Adrian was punishing me because I wanted more from life, that he was turning the children against me out of revenge, but the judge only looked at the papers again, asking about Adrian's new inheritance and how it would affect the children's future, about the accounts already frozen until final orders were signed, about the house where they would stay because moving them again would be too much change at once. Margaret sat behind Adrian with the same steady expression she had worn through every step of this, hands folded like someone praying without words, eyes never leaving the judge while Thomas stayed home with the children so they would not hear this details about where they would live or how weekends would be divided. My parents sat near the back, saying nothing, because Adrian had already spoken to them weeks ago, explaining everything before I even thought about asking for their help. And now they only nodded when the judge mentioned stability, as if they agreed. The children were better off staying with him instead of watching me scramble for arguments that sounded smaller every time I opened my mouth. Lila did not come at all. No calls, no messages, nothing since the day Adrian took the children for the weekend and never brought them back except for short visits arranged through lawyers instead of family conversations. Even Victor had disappeared. No texts, no flowers, no visits to my office since the first court date, when Adrian's lawyer handed over screenshots I thought were private, but apparently nothing stays private when someone quiet enough gathers proof, before speaking a single word. The judge read the final orders, like someone closing a door, granting Adrian full primary custody, granting him control of all joint accounts until final division, granting him the right to keep the family house for the children's stability and granting me visitation only on weekends, arranged through the court until everything settled months from now. There was no anger in the words, no drama, just signatures and instructions, while Adrian nodded once like a man, checking off the last box on a list he had been carrying for years. His lawyer gathered the folders calmly, while I stood there waiting for someone to look at me, to ask if I wanted to say anything else, to give me some way to explain how none of this was supposed to happen, because Adrian was never the man who won things, never the man who walked away first, never the man who made plans bigger than anyone else could see until they were already finished. But no one looked at me because the judge had already moved to the next case, because Margaret was already standing to leave, because Adrian was already holding the door for his lawyer, like everything was settled now and there was nothing left for words to change. Outside the courthouse, he loaded the folders into his car before the children came running from Margaret's car to meet him, their backpacks bouncing, their voices loud in the parking lot, while he bent to listen to them with that same calm face he had, worn through everything, the same steady hands packing bags and signing papers and closing doors behind him one by one until nothing was left open for me to push through. They climbed into his car like this was normal now, like weekends with me and school nights with him were the way things had always been. Like the house with Margaret and Thomas, reading bedtime stories in the big yard, was the only home they remembered clearly anymore. My parents told me later, Adrian had already set up college accounts with part of the inheritance money, that he was talking about trust funds and future plans while I was still standing in a courtroom waiting for someone to tell me this was temporary, that things would go back the way they were if I just explained myself better, if I just made people see I was the one who deserved everything he had taken back. But Adrian never looked back when he left the courthouse, never paused like someone unsure of his own victory, never hesitated like a man who might change his mind later, just opened the car door for the children, checked their seatbelts, and drove away with the same calm shoulders and steady posture he carried out of every room since the first night I laughed about him being broke. I watched the car turn the corner, with the folders in the trunk, the children in the back seat, Margaret's car following behind, like they were one long line of people moving forward, while I stood on the sidewalk, holding nothing but the final order. Papers with my name printed under respondent, black ink sharp against the white page, proof that everything I thought was mine now belonged to someone who never raised his voice once while taking it all back. The house felt different when I walked through it alone that evening. quiet in a way that was not peace but absence, the walls holding the shape of a family that was already gone, even though the furniture still stood where it always had, even though my things were still in the closet, like nothing had changed except the locks on the doors and the names on the accounts, and the silence on the other side of the rooms where Adrian used to sit sorting papers I never bothered to read until they turned into the signatures that ended everything without a single chance left for me to stop it. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.